Dames en heren, goedemiddag.
Hoi hoi, hello and welcome to the Meet Maastricht podcast. I'm Katrina and together with our resident local Lucy, we will be exploring some of the amazing stories that make Maastricht so special. So sit back, relax and join us as we learn about our favourite Dutch city. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 9 of the Meet Maastricht podcast. We are back with our regularly scheduled programming this week. So it's me and Lucy after our little special guest use last time. How are you, Lucy?
Oh, just, holding on. There's lots of stuff about the lockdown being pleasant, and there is other stuff not so good, but I'm just hoping everybody stays well and healthy and sensible through all this.
Yeah, and keeping up with all the updates. Everything seems to change all the time. So this week we are talking about the Dinghuis, which sounds terrible in my Australian accent. Do you want to tell us more about the Dinghuis and say it properly so that we know what we're talking about?
Well, for English speakers, the word ding is not so very hard to pronounce, but it might be a little hard to understand. We're going to talk about what that is and how that came to be. Mm-hmm. It stands for ding, comes from the Dutch word geding, which means a court case, basically. So you should really understand the Dinghuis as a court. Okay. And it was the courthouse for a long time. And we will talk about that, how old it is, the place it stands, the uses it was put to. We will talk about the historical context, which is very crucial to understand about Maastricht. The fact that for hundreds and hundreds of years, Maastricht had two rulers, two authorities. That is really weird, but it is a crucial fact in Maastricht's history. We will talk about the different functions the building had. We will talk about the history of the building, because that is pretty interesting as well. And the last segments will be dedicated to the more recent uses the building was put to and the changes it was put through up to the present day. That's what we will be dealing with in the next little hour or so, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're starting on the building and sort of where it is. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, that is. I think everybody who lives here has seen that.
Yeah.
Because I find that no matter where people are from, they always manage in a very short period of time to find at least the Grote Straat, the main shopping street.
Yeah.
Because there is Pinky's on the corner and there is McDonald's right across on the corner of the Vrijthof and there's the HEMA, all these fixtures of contemporary life. And it seems that everybody from whatever age group will have found those very quickly. Well, the Grote Straat starts at the Vrijthof, and when you walk down the Grote Straat from the Vrijthof, you see in front of you all the time this very tall but also very slender old building.
Yeah.
And that is het Dinghuis.
Yeah.
And today you might go there because the tourist information is housed on the ground floor. And that, of course, will be the last chapter in the history, the uses of the building was put to. But that's where it is. So smack in the middle of town.
Yeah. Is there a reason why it was there, particularly?
Yes, because we will get to talk about that. There was a concentration of administrative buildings in that part of the medieval town. Okay. And that is also why the streets, the contemporary streets, are called the Grote Straat and the Kleine Straat, and not Staat as in state. Many Dutch people will assume they're called the Grote Straat as street, but that's just not correct. Correct. There was an accumulation of administrative buildings there, so that's why the streets are called that. I think I will first deal with the historical contexts, because that is so crucial in understanding how Maastricht was organized for centuries until the French Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And it is also something very, very idiosyncratic. This is you find this in this particular way not very often, to put it lightly. This Maastricht having two rulers originates way back in the history of the town, with the fact that there were two grand churches almost from the beginning.
Mm.
And this is from the beginning, is meaning post the Roman era, so in the early Middle Ages, the 7th, 8th century. That's what we're talking about. So that's a really long time ago.
Yeah.
We do not have a great deal of sources about that time. So quite a bit of this is conjecture. But we know a few things. There was Our Sweet Lady Church,
Mm-hmm.
which is still standing there, with a great deal of power and privilege. And there was also Servaas, Saint Servatius Basilica, on the outskirts of the medieval town, also very powerful and privileged. And so there was a lot of competition between these churches, and of course they would regularly involve their overlords to decide these conflicts. The highest authority of Our Sweet Lady Church was, now I should not go and confuse this, because it is not the very obvious one. The highest authority for the Our Sweet Lady Church was along the church line. So that was the Bishop of Liège. Okay. And once again, I have mentioned this before, but you do have to remember that until the French Revolution, so the end of the 18th century, the church was a state. It was a civic authority as well as a religious one.
Right.
So the bishops of Liège were princes as well. They were temporal rulers. They ruled territories and towns and armies and stuff like that. So this is something to keep in the back of your mind. So Luik ruled Our Sweet Lady's Church. Mm-hmm. And Servaas, with all its belongings, all its territory, all its privileges and powers stretching over parts of northwestern Europe, came directly under the German emperor, which meant, far away and, hard to reach and all of that. So it meant it gave that particular church a great deal of leeway to act on its own. So this is where it starts, with this push and pull between these two powerful churches. And then in the 12th century, there is a king, Lotharius II. Mm-hmm. He decides that the existing situation will be sort of formalized in proclaiming there will be two types of people living in Maastricht, the people of Our Sweet Lady and the people of Servaas. Mm. Okay, this doesn't end the punch-ups all the time, and the pushing and pulling goes on until the end of the 13th century, when in 1284, in a document called the Oude Kaarte, the Old Charter, the definitive arrangement is made. And please bear with me here, because this is a matter of a succession of authority devolving from generation to generation and from dynasty to dynasty. So at this point, the place of the German emperor is taken by the Duke of Brabant.
Okay.
I can't help it. It's just that way. A few centuries later, the place of the Duke of Brabant is taken by the provinces of the Dutch Republic. And that is the reason why we are Dutch. With everything that this devolvement entailed over the centuries. And of course the vagaries of war and diplomacy and all of the rest of it. But that is how that line goes. We could just as easily have been part of the French Republic or part of some German state.
Yeah.
And also something very important to remember, and we will keep coming back to this in our themed walks and bike rides. You've got something fun to look forward to in the coming months when we are allowed to go outside again. All of this only applies to Maastricht. You really, really have to imagine this area in particular as a hodgepodge of territories and authorities and competing dukedoms and fiefdoms and independent this and that and whatever. So whatever I am saying only applies to the city.
Okay.
Okay, so here we are at this division of labor and authority and who does the administration, who does the court cases, being settled 500 years ago at the end of the 13th century. And this will last, this division of labor, so to speak, this will last until the French Revolution. So, because it is such a thing that has such a long-term validity, I thought it was necessary to go into that in some depth. Okay, then how did they organize this in daily life?
Yeah.
We will take this up from about the 13th century. Maastricht is already a real city by then. Not some tenuous stronghold defending a bridge across a river, but a city.
Yeah.
And that necessitated the ordering of urban life. And this was done through, the English words here are a bailiff and sheriffs or aldermen. In Dutch, they are called schout and schepenen.
Okay.
And there would be two sets here. One set representing Brabant, the Duke, and one set representing Luik, the bishop.
Okay.
So there were two sets of everything, and they would combine pretty much all the functions that we now have divided over the three branches of government. So schout and schepenen would pretty much have all authority within the city walls over each of them half the citizenry. Because as a Maastrichtenaar, you would be either Luiks or Brabants. You wouldn't be both. And this was all to keep. This was all to keep these jurisdictions clear.
Yeah. Wow. Was it also sort of geographically divided, or were people just higgledy-piggledy everywhere?
I don't know.
So you could be living, everyone mixed together.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
This is just, I'll look it up for you.
Yeah. I can't imagine having the two separate jurisdictions.
I am supposing now it would still go back on where it started with the parishes. So I'm guessing here, right? I'm guessing. I will try and corroborate this from a reputable source. But I am guessing that if you were a member of the parish of Our Sweet Lady, you would still be beholden to. God, let's keep this straight now, because I find this very confusing too. You would still be beholden to the bishop.
Yes.
And if you belong to the parish of Silvaas, you would be beholden to the authority of the Duke. So Brabant.
Yeah.
I'm assuming for the regular people, it would depend on the parish. Because it took quite a long time before there were more parishes, and then there were really only two: St. Martin's in Week and St. Matthew's outside the second city wall, which is now the Boss Street.
Right.
Anyway, we digress, because it gets even more confusing. Okay, we've got these two lords, we've got these two jurisdictions, we've got these two sets of schout and schepenen, bailiff and his alderman. And then in the course of the 13th century, of course, the citizens not only increased in number, but also in wealth and in a drive for a political say in the matters of the city.
Yeah.
So they wanted to co-rule, or they at any rate wanted to share power with these two representatives of the two sets of representatives of the lords. And so citizen rule was incorporated in the administrative and justice system of the city as well, just to make things easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they would be called the burgemeester and gezworenen, so the mayor and the sworn men, because of course all of this was staffed by males.
Yes.
And for a while they felt it was a good thing if all of these administrations, so the Luik, the Brabant and the local one, were all housed in the same place. And that is what they did. And they had their courts, they had their offices, they had the prison in the building that was standing on the spot of the Dinghuis before the Dinghuis stood there.
Okay.
So that particular spot in the city has been an administrative headquarters and a court for a long, long time.
Yeah. I hope they had good signage, because you won't turn up and got to figure out where you're going, don't you?
Yeah, but I guess at that time, well, if this is a situation you are born into and grow up, people would know.
Yeah, I suppose so.
I don't think that would have been a problem. People would have known. And of course, things never stay the same, because, as I said, in the 13th century, the citizenry demanded its own role in administrative and judicial affairs. And in the 14th century, when the citizenry gets even richer and more powerful, the rule of the Luik and Brabant overlord representatives declines even further. Right. And then they decide they're going to split headquarters again. So that is what happens. And the building we are seeing today is built sometime, not a long time, sometime before 1470. So this is the 15th century.
Yeah, wow.
And then it houses the High Court for Luik and the High Court for Brabant, and then each with their bailiff and alderman, and they try both the criminal and the civil cases.
Okay.
Because, as I said very much in the beginning, the name Dinghuis comes from geding, and geding meaning a court case. So it was a courthouse, and it has been that for quite a long time. And then in the 17th century they got kicked out by the garrison, and they used it for a while, and the courts returned to the Dinghuis, which was then totally decrepit. As you can imagine, it had been standing for over 200 years.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the city had finalized its plans for a new city hall on the market, and that's the building we all know, which is still in use as a city hall, and there all the branches of government could be housed together again. So the administration, the court, the prison, that was all housed there again, and that meant that the role of the Dinghuis as a courthouse was ended, and was also ended for good.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're going to have a quick break, and we'll be back with you very shortly. Hello everyone, we are back after our quick break. So what are we talking about now? The Dinghuis just moved, well, the administration just moved onto the Markt. So where are we going from here, Lucy?
I thought I would describe a little bit the building itself, because we haven't really talked about that. I've talked about what the functions it had. So I will say a few words about the building itself. I think, as far as the building is concerned, I think I already mentioned that we do not know exactly when it was built, but we do know for sure from written sources that it was in use in 1470. So, well, whichever way you look at it, that is a respectable age.
Yeah.
It is the building itself. We need a written source because the building itself is a bit hard to date. the front of it, the facade, is in a style that is from the first half of the 16th century. So that has been added later, and this happened often, also with houses of wealthy families.
Yeah.
You displayed your wealth or your power by updating your facade, and the stone facade that was made probably in the middle of the 16th century, as I said, also contained a series of statues. So it was much more decorated than the version of it that we see today.
Okay.
But during the troubles of the Reformation, there was a lot of destruction going on in churches, but also, well, against anything Catholic, really. So the statues of the saints that were on the facade of the Dinghuis were destroyed.
Yeah.
It is important to realize that only the facade of the building is in stone. It is a huge, huge construction, 30 meters high, of timber.
Right.
And that is something to watch out for in old cities anyway. You walk down the streets and you see all these stone fronts, but every chance you get of looking at the side or the back of a building, do, because that will generally be older and that will generally be a timber frame. So that's really interesting to see. And with the Dinghuis, you can see it very clearly because it is adjacent to a narrow street going to the Maas River. So there you can see this timber frame, and of course it's not the original one, but we will get back to that later. And it originally had a different ordering of the floors, but of course it being the age it has, and it having been dedicated to so many different uses, there was constant alteration going on, and there was necessary upkeep. The one change that is the most visible on the outside is the fact that the entrance was changed over time several times. When you see it now, there is a double stairway to the door on the first floor, which is always used as a stage by the musicians during Carnival because it's totally accessible and so handy. But there used to be a gallery on stone pillars. So the front of the building just looked very differently because of that. And when that gallery was removed, apparently the stone pillars were kept, because one of them now serves as a pillar for the very modern statue of Jupiter on our Sweet Lady Square.
Oh.
And in the 18th century, they'd taken that gallery down and they added doors and windows on the street level. So the front of the building has looked differently over the ages. And of course, Maastricht being a military stronghold for centuries as well, there was always damage of sieges and sackings to be repaired. And even in the run-up to the Second World War, the building was reinforced with concrete floors higher up, which may have made it stronger in the short run, but which threatened to just to destroy it, because it pushed all the walls out in the 20th century.
Oh, okay.
So those concrete floors that had been put in also had to be taken out again.
Yeah.
Okay, after the courts moved out, courts and the administration, it became pretty much a multi-purpose building, and it is really incredible what they have all managed to put in there. And it is a long list, so bear with me. But the one function it had pretty much from the beginning, and might still be used for today, is as a watchtower, because as I said, it is very high. Yeah. It's a very high building, and that tiny tower on the top is not just decorational. It has always been used to keep watch.
Has the tiny tower always been there, or was that a later addition?
As far as I am aware, it wasn't there from the beginning, but it was added very soon.
Okay.
Because they realized the height was very useful to keep a round-the-clock watch for fire. We do not realize how dangerous those old cities were Most of the roofs used to be thatch, which is highly flammable, of course.
Yeah.
Most of the buildings used to be timber frames, which is flammable.
Yeah.
So the risk of fire was enormous. So there would be constant watch going on round the clock, and the people manning this little tower and other watch towers would be obliged to give particular signals during the day and the night to signal all was safe. And Maastricht has been lucky with fires that we haven't had any enormous blazes here.
Yeah.
And of course, keeping a watch for enemies approaching the city, that was very practical as well. Of course, especially in the 16th century, which was one war after another, and being up there, you could just as well keep an eye out for armies approaching. So that is what it was used for too. And then even in the Second World War, there would be people up there keeping a watch for approaching bombers, and then signal for the sirens to be sounded all around the city, so people could dive for cover.
Yeah.
And then the spaces below the roof were used as storage and theatre and guard room for civilian patrol. Civilian patrol along the lines of what everybody knows in the shape of the famous Nachtwacht, Rembrandt's painting of the Night Watch.
Ah.
So that is civilians going out at night to patrol the city, their own city, and make sure everything was secure. And that is of course in all European cities that go back to those days, they would have civilian patrols like that, and of course they did have them here too.
Yeah.
Okay, this brings us to the 19th century, when the Dinghuis was used as a prison again, but also as a depot for the arms of the civilian militia. But this ended halfway the 19th century when a new prison was built and when the militia was abolished. And then military bands would practice there. Building would get more and more decrepit over time. Around 1850, they had a lengthy discussion in the city council about demolishing it completely, and happily that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the 19th century, it became the first meeting room for the historical foundation, which is still in existence today, het LGOG, Limburgs Geschied- en Oudheidkundig Genootschap, the Historical and Archaeological Society of Limburg. They could meet there, they could house their collection there.
Yeah.
And that was the start of the provincial museum. And of course it was too small and too dark and too cold, so everything was moved out again in 1940.
Yeah.
And the list goes on. For what do we use these rooms for? Well, a telephone exchange, for instance. Chamber of Commerce. There used to be a cafe on the ground floor, which must have been cozy.
Yeah.
There was a community center organized by Catholic artists and intellectuals to have a meeting place and to present cultural events. There were all sorts of military uses that it was put to, administrative and storage, and this extended also into the period of the colonial war in Indonesia. Because of course by the end of the Second World War, the Dutch colony of Indonesia said, okay, now we are rid of the occupying forces of the Japanese, let's also get rid of the Dutch rulers we've had for a few centuries. We can rule ourselves, and of course that became a colonial war, and which the Indonesians won, of course. And also, I'd never heard of this. Also, for about a decade, Dinghuis housed so-called life schools, where girls, it's just so interesting again, only girls starting at 17 years of age could get training to be good housewives.
Oh.
Yeah. I suppose this was also intended for a specific segment of society, but I'm not sure about this, but I have this suspicion.
Yeah.
And then on happier notes, the ground floor was also used for quite a long time as the site for what has become a legendary puppet theatre. The name Piekendassen is known by all the Maastrichtenaren, for, yes, his puppets and his performances. And twice a week he would put on a show for children. Twice a week he would put on a show for adults, and it was wildly popular. And the funny thing is that a lot of children all around the country will know him as well, because when he was a venerable old man with white hair and a white beard, he also played a part in the Dutch version of Sesame Street.
Ah.
Yeah. So you can find television footage of him, because I'm not sure there would be any registration of the puppet plays.
I have a very sort of soft place in my heart for Dutch Sesame Street, because when Matt and I first moved here, literally on our first day, we were staying in a hotel. It was New Year's Day. We had television, and all we had was live television. We were absolutely exhausted from Australia, so it was 25 hours, and we turned on the television and got Dutch Sesame Street, and were very confused because the characters were similar, but Big Bird was blue, and we were hysterical. We were laughing and crying, and it was so. I have very strong images of Dutch Sesame Street in my mind.
Yes, a long flight will do that to you. Yes. But just go find Picadossi. That's maybe no, you haven't seen him, because he has not been with us for several years now. Anyway, to finish the story of the Dinghuis, in the middle of the 60s, it was really too decrepit again for anything at all. But getting the money together to restore it the way that would have been necessary still was postponed for years and years. And in the meantime, it did still serve as a youth center. This was an initiative by a Franciscan father, as so much of the urban activities in social services were. And this was intended for the 16 to 21-year-olds, and he started with about 300 people, and within a year there were about 800. And they would have these evenings of dancing on beat music, which of course the older generation thought was absolutely abhorrent, and they were pretty much dancing, stomping the building to bits. I mean, you can't blame them entirely for that, because, as I said earlier, the lack of upkeep and the lack of repairs, the addition of the heavy concrete floors higher up, they were in the process of demolishing the building anyway. So you can't really say that the young people destroyed it.
No.
Serious restorations finally did start off in the late 60s, but a new use for the building was only settled on in the middle of the 70s, and in the meantime they had their work cost cut out for them. So the restoration was done in fits and starts whenever they managed to get some money together. And because they kept making disconcerting discoveries about, oh gosh, this is about to fall over, and oh dear, this is totally rotted away. And then in the 1980s there was the economic crisis, so funds were even tighter than usual, and we had scaffolding on the front of the building and in the side street for years and years. So you could only pass through that street in a sort of dark tunnel underneath the scaffolding, and people complained no end, of course. But the exterior restoration was finally finished in 1979, and they could take the scaffolding down, and the interior pretty much the same sort of story. But then in the middle of the 80s, the interior was finally done as well, but because the VVV, the Tourist Information Office, basically raised the money for that. As I said, because of the economic crisis in the 80s, getting public funds together to restore the building was just pretty much impossible. So the VVV did a fundraiser and managed to finish the restoration of the interior, and they've been there ever since. And you can walk into the ground floor when things are normal. Yeah. Okay. That concludes the history of Dinghuis. And yes, since that covers about 500 years. As briefly as possible, that is, still quite a lot of time to cover.
Yeah. If you're not aware, if you are someone who listens to the podcast, just the audio, we also put up a video on YouTube with lots of pictures, and we also put a page on the website for each episode of the podcast explaining the pictures. A lot of them are from the regional archive, which is a wonderful resource. And so if you haven't had a look on the website or on the YouTube video, definitely make sure you check those out, because there are tons of photos, and I do my best to try and find things that are relevant to all the things we've talked about during the podcast. Well, I think that's us for today. So thank you for listening. What will we be talking about next time, Lucy?
I think I mentioned a Franciscan in this pod. I think we will devote the next one to the second Franciscan church, the Minderbroedersberg. So the mountain of the Lesser Friars. Oh. You all know this building. It's the headquarters of the University of Maastricht.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So in that sense, it's not a really public building, but it is accessible from time to time. But of course, it has an interesting history.
Yeah. Well, we'll look forward to hearing all about it, and don't forget that later this week we'll also be doing our Ask a Local segment, so tune in to hear about the one cemetery in Maastricht, and we hope you enjoy the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, and don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook by searching Meet Maastricht, and on Instagram at @meet_Maastricht. If you would like to learn more about us, you can also visit our website at meetmaastricht.eu, where you can buy tickets and subscribe to our monthly newsletter, so you're always up to date. Thanks again, and tune in next time to learn more about our beautiful city.
Tot ziens.